Are you sometimes hard on yourself? Sometimes are you critical of other people? I have been a self-proclaimed hardest person on myself that anyone could be because I thought it was pushing me to greatness. I thought the harder I was on myself, the better I would perform. And boy, was I wrong. The harder I was on myself, the worse I performed, but I didn't know it. I thought I was being pushed to be better by being hard on myself, but what it really was a big anchor weighing me down. And once I recognized, as soon as I cut the cord of that anchor and started to be kind to myself and lift myself up, I actually performed way, 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 way better. And so this had been a lie my whole life that I needed to be hard on myself to do well. And when I started to be kind to myself, I did 10 times better. So we're going to learn the lesson today. This is the wound of guilt. It is the wound of judgment. We all have this wound. We all need to heal this wound, and we'll all perform better when we do. Let's rock. Welcome to the Good Mood Revolution. I'm your host, Matt O'Neill, and I've spent the last 15 years mastering the art of lasting happiness. Look, happiness isn't just a feeling. It is a skill, and it's a skill that you can learn and master. This show is your training ground. Let your good mood revolution begin now. So the wound of judgment and guilt. This is the second of the most destructive bad moods that get in the way of our happiness. And it's one we all have. There's no way to grow up and not be wounded in some way with judgment. And then the other side of that judgment is guilt. It's this feeling that I need to be punished for things I've done wrong, and others need to be punished for things that they've done wrong. Both of these are rooted in this lie of judgment and are not helpful to us at all. So as I'd said in the introduction, we think that being hard on ourselves is going to push us to do better. And I thought that my whole life. Well, it's not true. It's not true. Like, I was a high performer and I was super hard on myself. I used to say I'm my own worst critic, and no one's harder on me than I am myself. And I was a perfectionist. And I thought all of these were good things. I used to actually say them with pride, that I'm my worst critic and I'm a perfectionist. And I used to think that was awesome. And then I learned the truth that I was actually being held back by those things. I thought they were making me do better. I thought if I cracked the whip on me that I would be even better and perform even better. The opposite was true. I went to a Tony Robbins event, and he said at that event, you think this is helping you, it's actually holding you back. It's like trying to run, but you've got a giant parachute behind you trapping all the wind, and you're running as fast as you can. And you think that this guilt and this judgment, this self-criticism is actually helping you run faster. But what it's doing is it's creating all this drag, and you're running slower. You just don't know it. And once you cut the lines of that parachute, man, you run 10 times faster. It's exactly what happened to me. As soon as I healed this wound of judgment and guilt, I started to be kind to myself. I started to notice everything I was doing right rather than what I was doing wrong. And then my performance took way off. And I started to become a very, very high successful person, even beyond my wildest dreams. And I want to help us all get over this wound. If nothing else, we'll just become happier. And that's a great thing, because then we're happier to be around, and we're less critical of others. We're more compassionate of others, and we make other people feel good in our presence because we've healed this wound. So where does this wound come from? It comes from childhood. We're raised, and as a kid, we spill something, we're having fun, and we spill stuff all over the house and make this huge mess. And our mom comes in and she's like, "What are you doing? That was so awful." And then we cry and we feel bad. Or we hurt our brother, or our sister, our sibling, and we get scolded and judged and yelled at. And then we feel bad. And then we go into our religion, and our religion says, "You're bad and you need to be punished." And then for me, out in my religion, I had to go into a little room and say sorry to the priest. And then he gave me punishment of like saying 100 Hail Marys, and I would go take my punishment. And I just felt like the way to improve was to be judged and punished, right? And that's just our upbringing. And we think that that's what makes us better, but it actually holds us back. So that's where it comes from. It comes from being judged by well-meaning people. The people in my church were beautiful, loving people. My mom and my dad were doing the best that they could. My mom loved me so much. She wanted to see me do so well. She was doing her best. And yet she was judging me and telling me that what I was doing needed punishment in order for me to be better. But we don't actually need punishment. The consequences of our actions are enough to teach us. The punishment just makes us feel worse. So then as we grow into an adult, there's a piece of us, it's called the upper ego, right? The super ego. It becomes our own parent, and we punish ourselves with guilt. So we've got a piece of our personality that then takes on the role of that parent when we become an adult, and we feel guilty, and we punish ourselves, and we judge ourselves. Well, you can know how much guilt you're carrying by how much you judge other people. And if you want to learn about how to overcome this emotion, I wrote about it in my book, Good Mood Revolution. It's the second bad mood to overcome of the 8. There are 8 bad moods that we can totally vanquish and have a lot more happiness in our life. And you can get that book on pre-order on Amazon now, Good Mood Revolution book. So I learned a lot about this from Matt Micheletti. He's the co-author of the book, The Inner Work. And this morning I was reading chapter 5 in The Inner Work of Relationships, and it specifically was talking about the wound of judgment and guilt. And there are some unmet childhood needs when we have this wound. We need the freedom to make mistakes and let the consequences teach us. And, these thoughts are, I should have known better. So when we make a mistake, that thought is, I should have known better, or I'm wrong, or they're wrong and they've made mistakes, or this is unacceptable, or they should be punished. And so we see this a lot. I'd say 80% of the world is living with all of this criticism and blame at other people, but all that blame at other people is really just self-judgment we're projecting out onto the world because we don't accept our own self making mistakes. We don't accept the world making mistakes. And then we become a pretty harsh critic. And here's the thing, you cannot be happy while criticizing and judging others at the same time. Those two things cannot coexist. So if you're ever judging someone or criticizing someone or saying that they're unacceptable, notice in that moment, you are not a happy human being. Now, how can you be happy? We can notice when somebody makes a mistake and have compassion for them, have understanding for them, have empathy for them. And it doesn't mean we allow ourselves to be abused or we allow bad things to happen in the world. We can still hold somebody accountable in a very loving way. And anytime we're compassionate and loving while we hold somebody accountable, rather than harshly judging them, we can be happy and holding someone accountable at the same time. So that's where we want to evolve to. And that's what this episode is all about, is how to be happy and not beat ourselves up with guilt and judgment. So there's 2 different forms of guilt that it shows up. One is an overcompensating form, and the other is an undercompensating form. I've had both. My wife has a tendency to be undercompensating more. I have a tendency to be overcompensating more. In the overcompensating defense mechanism, we're overly critical of others. In my 20s, man, nobody could live up to my standards. My standards were so high. Like any employee couldn't hit them. All of my friends couldn't hit my standards, and my standards were impossible. I couldn't hit my standards. I thought this was a good thing. It wasn't. It was actually making everyone around me miserable and making me miserable at the same time. And it wasn't helping me get these impossible standards anyway. It didn't matter how much I achieved. My standards were so high, it was never enough. And so I was never really happy. And even if I was successful and I had success in my 20s, success without happiness is the ultimate failure. So it was a failure. But again, I'm not judging myself. I'm just letting you know that if you're going through that same thing where you hold everybody, especially yourself, to ridiculously high standards, it's not actually helping you be happy. And you can have both. You can have success and happiness at the same time when we learn to let go of this overcompensating guilt. The other side, the undercompensating, this is more my wife, Katie, the way that she would process guilt. The undercompensating becomes a people pleaser. So we feel guilt and we don't want to be judged by others. So we just always say yes to whatever they ask us to do. We avoid conflict. We know that if we get into a conflict, It could be judgment from them on us. And since, again, we've got this wound that we don't want to be judged, we just avoid the conflict altogether. And my wife loves to avoid conflict. Again, as an overcompensating, I dive into conflict. I want to judge. I want to criticize, right? So that would be my go-to with this emotion. Either way, both of them are not healthy. And I've certainly been a people pleaser in my life, for sure. Wanting everybody to like me. And that's where it comes from. And then we strive to be a good boy or a good girl. And I did that growing up. I wanted to be the good boy. And again, that comes from not wanting to be judged harshly. So in relationships, like in our intimate relationship, this can cause some problems too. And a lot of this, I'm reading through Matt Micheletti's chapter here, chapter 5 of the inner work of relationships, to just talk about how this wounded judgment can really harm us. But in relationships, having this wound creates conditional love, where if you do everything I want you to do, then I expect, then I'll do the things you want me to do. And if you don't do the things that I want you to do, then I might not do the things that you want me to do. And so having this wound creates a very tit for tat type relationship where we're always keeping score and we're always tallying. Like, we'll keep score of the mistakes that somebody made for years on end. And I know that I did that in relationships, and I would have partners who would say, oh yeah, last year you said this thing. And I'm like, man, last year we're going to bring that up. And I'm like, well, last year you said this thing. And so if we're bringing in our conflict stuff that happened a while ago, again, that's coming from this wound of judgment and this wound of guilt. And we're going to learn how to heal it here. So healing it is allowing ourselves to be imperfect. In fact, imperfection is part of being human. And when we make a mistake, allowing the consequences to be our teacher rather than punishment. And we need to be with somebody that that also is highly conscious, that allows us to make mistakes and understands that making mistakes is human, and has compassion for us and empathy and patience as we make mistakes, knowing that they too make mistakes. And that if we give them the compassion and empathy and the patience, when they make mistakes, maybe they're more likely to do it with us. So both people can grow in this, and we've all had guilt, and we all punish ourselves and others with criticism and judgment. It's just part of being human, but we're working to reduce it in this episode. So some affirmations about how to overcome this. A really good one is, it's okay to make mistakes. Another one is, I'm always doing my best. Another one is, everyone else around me is always doing their best. How about this? I'm always learning and improving. Or, natural consequences are not personal. And I can always handle the consequences of my choices. So if you need to, rewind that section and write these affirmations down. These are the counters to the trauma of guilt and judgment. And the more you learn to lean into that it's okay to make mistakes, in fact, it's human to make mistakes, and that the consequences are my teacher and that I can handle the consequences, the more you start to release others from the need to be perfect and allow them to make mistakes and allow them to learn from their consequences and know that they're doing their best. So the wounded judgment would say, you point out my mistakes today, and suddenly I'm 3. Remembering mom's scolding, her critical routine, feeling wrong and judged, just like back then. My unhealed wounds get reopened again. That would be if the wounded judgment had something to say. So what we need to do is we need to create safety to be imperfect, and just recognize that being imperfect is part of being human. We're not perfect. We're not God. We're here learning, and the way we learn is by making mistakes. But that's the way we get better. How do we learn compassion for others if we don't make mistakes ourselves and feel hurt? And so when someone else makes a mistake, how can we surround them with love and compassion if we ourselves haven't made mistakes and know that that feels bad? So it's okay. Some of the things that you might notice with somebody who has a pretty high wound of judgment is overcritical behavior. And again, this was me. I was overcritical with everybody around me, including myself. Another thing we mentioned is conditional love. Another thing is a fear of making mistakes. And this goes back to that people pleaser, that I have to be a perfectionist so that I don't get judged. And, as Matt Micheletti said here, we bury and repress our true selves to never be perceived negatively as we become a people pleaser. We're being inauthentic. And this isn't a way to have happiness. We're going to be our happiest when we're our absolute true self. And we know I'm going to make some mistakes. I'm going to be imperfect, but that's just part of the human experience. I want to do the best I can and fully express myself and know it's okay and safe to make some mistakes. And I'm not going to be judged harshly by God because I'm doing the best I can. And if someone else judges me harshly, that's their wounded judgment, but I don't need to punish myself with it. So an overcompensating partner with a wounded judgment. So this is me. We succumb to this delusion, a belief that we can exist without ever erring and labeling and being labeled as wrong. In our relentless pursuit of this unattainable ideal, we become neurotic, attempting to exert control over every facet of our lives and relationships. Our overcritical nature surfaces, directed both inwardly and outwardly. We find ourselves resenting not only our own perceived flaws, but also everyone else's perceived flaws. And any trace of imperfection becomes unbearable and threatening. This intolerance towards mistakes and imperfections originates in our deep-seated aversion to judgment. We set exceedingly high expectations for ourselves and others. We extend this perfectionism not only to our surroundings, but also to our personal appearance and maybe even the personal appearance of our partner. We expect our partner to adhere to our exacting standards. We inadvertently exert pressure on them to conform to our ideals. And our sense of righteousness is unwavering. We may appear resolute in our commitment to our moral values and principles. Privately, we may transgress our own moral codes while projecting an image of moral superiority. We lean towards emotionally cold communication, often coming off as cutting, critical, or even harsh. Yeah, this was me. This was me and my overcompensating wound of rejection. And I remember like just being harsh to people. I made a secretary cry. She was doing the best she could. Sure, she was human. She made some mistakes. She wasn't living up to my standards. I was so harsh to her that she was in tears. And I was cold. I was cold-hearted about it. Again, I thought this was a good thing. I thought that demanding this performance was going to help her and help me and help all of us. All it really did, though, was alienate her from me. And then do you think she really wanted to perform at a high level after the way I treated her? No, absolutely not. And then my little brother, he's his own man, right? But he was always my little brother and I was always 3 years older. And I always was being like, hey man, you can do this better. You could do this better. I was being a harsh critic on him. I thought it was helping. I wasn't. So every time that we spoke, he was just waiting for me to tell him what I thought he could do better. And what I was really telling him was, you're not good enough. And man, heartbreaking for me to realize now. At the time, what I was really saying was, I'm not good enough. And I was saying it to myself over and over and over all day long. Matt, you didn't do this good enough. You made that mistake. You said this and you sounded stupid. You said this and that person got one up on you. And I was constantly judging myself and critiquing myself. And then that was then projected onto other people, and other people were doing things the wrong way. And of course, I knew the right way, which was the only way to do things, which was my way. And again, I thought all of this was helping me. So here's a simple exercise you can do. And I adopted this, and this really changed this wounded judgment. Every day, I write down 3 things I did well. So the wounded judgment, this guilt, constantly is bringing to mind all the things I did wrong. Your wounded judgment, your guilt, constantly is showing you where you're not measuring up. This is the ego. It wants to show you where you made a mistake, thinking that if you focus on all your mistakes, you'll make them better. Well, what we focus on expands. So as our brain keeps bringing up all the places that we're messing up, we start messing up more. But if we can retrain our brain to focus on all the things we do well, we start to do well more often. So it's really simple. Every morning, and I do this to this day, it's been 15 years. Every single day for 15 years, I've grabbed a paper and a pen, and I've written down 3 things I did well yesterday. It doesn't take long, maybe 5 minutes, but more like 2 or 3 minutes. In 2 or 3 minutes, I just think of 3 things from yesterday that I did well. Some mornings that's hard to do. And when you first start this practice, it's really hard to do because your mind is so used to telling you where you're not measuring up. But that's when you really have to fight through. Well, what happens is your brain knows tomorrow you're going to ask it for 3 more things you did well. Your brain starts to keep an open file looking and scanning your life for all the things you're doing well because it knows you got to write them down tomorrow. And your brain's always trying to conserve energy. So then it starts to notice all the things you're doing well in the moment so you can write them down the next day. Well, what happens is you start to affirm all that's right about yourself and you become less self-critical. And then you start to notice what other people are doing right. And you start to tell them, hey, I noticed when you did that right. I noticed when you did that right. Oh man, that was amazing when you said that. Holy cow, you look so good today. That dress looks amazing. Man, I am the biggest complimenter now. And it's not inauthentic at all. It's so authentic. I'm not making it up. It's because I compliment myself every single morning by writing down these 3 things. And now it's just so second nature. I'm always seeing what's going right. It's so easy for me to see what's going right in others. And it's just authentic to who I am now. You can totally change guilt with 3 things you did well. And it's just a simple practice you can do every morning. All right, what triggers this feeling of guilt? We get triggered with perceived mistakes. We get triggered with this idea of right and wrong, that we know it's right and we know it's wrong. The truth is, we don't really know what's right and wrong. God knows that. We're not the judge. God's the judge. When we give up the role of being the judge and just let God handle the judgment, huge weight off of us. And by the way, God's not judging either. You want to know what happens when you make a mistake? You get a negative consequence. That's not judgment. That's just cause and effect. And that's how God teaches us. When we make a mistake, we're free to make mistakes. We get a negative consequence. Then we have to deal with a negative consequence. And then we learn. Another thing that triggers the wound of judgment is strict rules, being under strict rules and strict discipline. For me, sometimes when I go to church, I'll feel that wound of judgment being triggered again because just sometimes that Christian doctrine of there's only one right way and only one right way to think, that's not true. It's not true. There's not only one right way. And so this idea that there's only one right way will trigger that feeling of guilt within me. And then I'll notice it and I'll sit with it and then I'll work to clear it out. So overcompensating and undercompensating. We've got an undercompensating partner, and this is Katie. Their defense mechanism is to avoid any sense of wrongness. The suppression often leads to becoming a people pleaser, a conflict avoider, and an individual who may struggle with self-expression, sacrificing authenticity, internalizing the wounds as true. Your primary objective becomes gaining approval from others and striving to be seen as good. And, when I first met Katie, if I wore anything that wasn't blue or gray, she would be like, I don't like that. You're drawing too much attention to yourself. And then her wardrobe was blue and gray because she didn't want to draw any attention to herself in a negative way. And her hair was always perfect. She always looked so beautiful and put together, and she needed me to look perfect and beautiful and put together. And it was really just about the trigger of guilt. She's come so far. We met in 2009. It's been 15 years. And the more and more and more I've just affirmed that it's okay to be who you are, and it's okay to not look perfect all the time, and that you're fully loved by me and fully accepted by me, this wound has started to heal, and she no longer needs everything to look perfect. I think having 4 kids and like the chaos that comes with that, and there's no way to keep life perfect with 4 kids, has also softened her on this, and realizing that it's okay for things not to be perfect, and that judgment from others isn't the end of the world. And really what matters is your own self-acceptance. So, but still, this is what she needs to work on. Matt Micheletti says, when we carry an overwhelming sense of responsibility and guilt and find it challenging to discern between valid concerns and mere expressions of other people's emotions. So this happens to us sometimes too. So sometimes if I'm upset, Katie thinks I'm upset at her. And then she gets all bent out of shape. And most of the time it doesn't have anything to do with her. But it's, again, that thought that I could be rejecting her. And that's from the wound of guilt and judgment, because she doesn't want to be rejected. And as an undercompensating individual with guilt, she's a people pleaser. So if I'm not happy, she starts to think, what did she do wrong? And it has nothing to do with her 99% of the time. And but again, she's growing in this aspect too. For me, I'm growing in my aspect of being overcompensating, where I'm critical on others. We're both growing. All right, I want to get to the good part. And the best part is how to create a relationship free of judgment. What we do is we look at natural consequences without moral or judgmental dimensions to them. Just a natural consequence. It's like my daughter Harper. When she was 3, there was a burning hot stove coil, and she reached over and grabbed it with her hand. And oh man, instant blisters, huge tears. Like, she was so surprised that her hand was in so much pain. And I'm standing right next to her. Now, of course, I could have judged myself and been like, you're a terrible parent. How did you let her grab that stove? Because I've done a lot of work. I didn't judge myself harshly. Yeah, I wish I could have helped her avoid that pain, but little hands are quick, right? So she reached in, grabbed that stove. Now, as she's wailing in pain, do you think I had to go over to her and shout at her and shout in her face and say, why in the world did you grab that, you stupid kid? No, this is my daughter. I freaking love her. She's wailing in pain. I grab her and run to her and hold her and grab ice and put the hand under water. And I'm doing everything I can to comfort her as she's learning from a natural consequence that when you touch a hot stove, your hand burns. Here's the crazy thing. Even at 3 years old, she was smart enough to learn from that consequence to never touch that stove again. I didn't need to punish her and tell her that she was stupid for doing it. She already knew if you touch a burning hot coil, it hurts a lot. So don't do that again. Every human is smart enough to learn from our consequences. We do not need punishment. She didn't need to beat herself up and say, I'm so stupid for doing that. I didn't need to tell her that. The consequence was enough. That's how it is always. So the natural consequence is enough. But sometimes natural consequences can be overwhelming. And, often we rush over the pain that we caused others, and we're unable to truly sit in the discomfort of our own consequence. We think punishment is learning, when in reality, punishment is just arbitrary added shame and has nothing to do with the lesson to be learned. Sitting in the discomfort of the consequence of negative choices is our teacher. And ultimately, that's what builds our self-esteem. It's an essential skill to be able to sit with the pain we usually unintentionally cause somebody and work through a healthy remorse, reconciling and reconnecting with them. It is through facing the overwhelm of our consequences head on that we embark on a journey of learning, growth, and wisdom. This process enables the development of a healthy self-esteem as we come to understand that navigating the overwhelm of our choices is a transformative experience that ultimately empowers us to make wiser decisions and create a more harmonious and loving relationship with others. So this is all of it, is that God doesn't judge us or punish us. He gives us free will to make decisions. And when we make those decisions, sometimes we hurt someone. And all we need to do is sit with the discomfort of that negative choice and the consequence that came from it and learn from it. We don't have to beat ourselves up. We just have to sit there and say, I made a negative choice and it hurt. And I don't need to do that again. And then say sorry and mean it and be better the next time. That's it. God's not judging us. He's not condemning us. Other people might condemn us. That's their own guilt. It has nothing to do with you. And you don't need to condemn yourself. Just learn, sit with the consequence, see the pain that was caused to yourself and others, and then be better. That is all that's required. And you're going to make more mistakes, right? To heal from this wound, we need to embrace the concept of discernment, recognizing that mistakes are not just inevitable, but essential. Mistakes are not just inevitable, but they're an essential part of being a human being. Errors are opportunities for growth rather than reasons for guilt or judgment. Embrace learning and mistakes. When we face our errors, we must shift from a mindset of inquiry to a mindset of growth. We can ask ourselves questions like, what have I learned from this experience? How can I approach this differently in the future? What is this situation teaching me? How do my actions impact both myself and others? When we make a mistake and we start to ask ourselves questions about how we can be better or what I've learned, it fosters a learning environment where mistakes are viewed as valuable lessons. In fact, where mistakes are viewed as opportunities for growth. And this is the counter to judgment. It's how we want to raise our kids too. And I'm not perfect at this. Look, I've got old programs from my mom and dad where they punish me for making mistakes. I've certainly done that with my kids. I am working so hard to undo some of that. And as my kids make mistakes, rush in with love, just like I rush in with love with Harper when she hurt her hand on the stove. Rush in with love as they kick their sister, or as they say something mean, and say, okay, look, I need you to be accountable here. You've kicked your sister. She's crying. You said something mean. She's crying. I love you unconditionally, and God loves you unconditionally, but I need you to learn from this. Sit with the discomfort of your sister crying. What are you learning from this? What were you trying to accomplish? Because you were trying to do something by making her feel bad. Did you accomplish what you wanted to accomplish? And what everyone always is trying to accomplish is a way to feel better. And so by asking my children if they feel better when they've made somebody cry, they start to recognize that, no, actually, I don't feel very good as somebody's crying. And then you can ask another question like, okay, well, what could we do instead next time? When you feel negative and you want to lash out and hurt somebody because you think it might make you feel better, you now have learned it doesn't actually make you feel better. So what are some other alternatives? Well, one of them is you can come talk to me. Come tell me how you're feeling bad. I'm a listening ear. And then we don't have to perpetuate the suffering just because you feel bad inside and you want to make someone else feel bad. It's not actually going to make you feel good. But what does make you feel good is sharing your burden with somebody who loves you and it isn't going to judge you. We want to be safe for a person to make mistakes around. And this goes for our significant other and our children. They need reassurance that errors will not lead to condemnation or harsh critique. We actually want to celebrate their mistakes. Like when a child or your spouse makes a mistake, celebrate it as an opportunity to grow and focus on the solution rather than the errors. Some supportive things to do. Instead of saying, you hurt my feelings or you did this, say, I'd like to talk about how I felt in the situation. So this is a key here. Anytime somebody's done something and we feel bad about it, if we say, you did this wrong, what we're saying is you're wrong. And that is going to perpetuate them feeling bad and having more judgment. Instead, we can say, hey, I'm feeling kind of bad here. When you did that thing, it triggered me. It made me feel bad. And when we take the word you out of it and then focus on ourselves, this is a way that we can hold somebody accountable without adding judgment and blame and guilt onto them. We also want to create a safe haven for vulnerability. We want to encourage authentic expression and experimentation and give people freedom to make errors without being judged. We want to approach conversations with empathy, maintaining a gentle and conversational tone. We want to be mindful of their inner child wounds of criticism and judgment. Remind them that they are loved and not wrong. To say, it is safe to make mistakes here, and your worthiness is never threatened by making an error around me. Finally, we want to inquire about their learning. When discussing mistakes, shift the conversation from criticism to curiosity. Ask questions like, what insights did you gain from this? What improvements can this experience offer us moving forward? This approach fosters reflection and growth. Well, this was a really big topic. It's a really important one. I feel like the majority, like I said, 80% of the world is run by guilt. And we see it all over the place. Look on social media, all this hate. Look at politics. Well, every side is judging and hating the other. But again, all this criticism and judgment is really just self-criticism projected onto others. I can hold somebody accountable while also loving them and supporting them and letting them know it's okay to make mistakes. But ask them to look, what did you learn and how can we be better? I also need the strength when I make a mistake to sit with the negative consequence, to say, wow, I really hurt someone. That feels awful. I don't need to beat myself up. I just need to sit with the remorse of this mistake and say, how am I learning? How am I growing? How am I improving from this? How did this, in fact, actually help me become a better version of myself? And how will I be better moving forward? This is a healthy way to grow and be a human being. Hope you really enjoyed this conversation on conquering judgment and guilt. Again, this is chapter 5 of Matt Micheletti's book, and it is chapter 2 of my book, The Good Mood Revolution, that you can get on Amazon on pre-order right now. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode with Matt O'Neill.